microphone is on mute. So if you want to raise your hand or ask a question, that mute button is in the bottom left. You should see a little microphone where you can mute or unmute yourself. Same goes with the video settings directly beside it. That part's completely up to you. This is a real informal event. The idea is to get in and just kind of network with each other in the acupuncture community, share a little bit of knowledge back and forth. And today we're going to be led by, today we're going to be led by, Nicholas, you're going to have to help me. Is it a W or a V sound in your last name?
Oh, Duchnowski.
Duchnowski, okay.
Yeah.
Duchnowski, you know.
Oh, yeah, probably a more proper Polish would be like Duchnowski, but we just say Duchnowski. So,
all right, we'll stick with Mr. Nicholas Duchnowski. I won't murder his last name at this point.
No worries.
And so he's going to lead us through our event today. This is hopefully a recurring thing that we're going to do at Dragon Rise as a lunch and learn, kind of, again, an informal sit down question and answer kind of session. With that said, we'll assume we have enough people here, and as they join, you'll just see them pop up. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Nicholas Duchnowski and let him run the show. So it's all you, sir.
Oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Do people have questions? I thought this was just a Q&A.
Oh, well, why don't you start with an introduction? Maybe that'd be a good place.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Nicholas Duchnowski. I graduated from Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in San Diego, California. I want to say that was probably 10 years ago now. So for a while, I got licensed in California, had a practice in California for a couple years. Then after a couple years, I moved to Kentucky I had some friends that I went to school with that they had a practice in Louisville, Kentucky, and they were expanding and they wanted some more people to help them with their practice. So I moved out to Louisville, Kentucky for a couple years and practiced out there. Got tired of Kentucky after a while and moved back to San Diego and started teaching at my old school and also having a practice. So I was teaching and practicing at the same time. Kind of around that time, I started putting stuff online just as sort of a review for students. It kind of started out that I had a lot of students that there were some people that they would come in and they'd I think it started when somebody said, I was teaching a class and they said, my work schedule changed. I can't make it to this class anymore, but I still really like your class. Can I record the class, have someone record the class and listen to it later? And I kind of said, well, if you just like put your phone on the desk, it's not going to turn out very well. So I could just record it. And then I started just recording little snippets at home so the students could review and putting that kind of stuff online. And that eventually turned into YouTube videos and stuff like that. And so now I do a lot of stuff online with a YouTube website and notes, handouts, practice tests, all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm in Colorado. Kind of once COVID happened and they closed down our campus, I didn't really want to live in San Diego and teach online. So I decided to move someplace where the cost of living is a little bit lower. Don't press any buttons, Meower.
You chose Colorado?
I had friends there, and yeah, I mean, I guess that sounds funny, but it's still cheaper. It's still cheaper than San Diego.
Fair enough.
I guess it would have been better to go back to Kentucky or go to the Midwest. But
so you're currently in practice, and you offer classes, like structured classes, or I should say like seminars, workshops. What exactly is your online? I guess your YouTube channel. What do you do?
Yeah. So there's a website, tcmstudy.net, and that's kind of the host of everything. That there's lectures. I'm just slowly going through all the herb classes and all the acupuncture classes. So there are videos on YouTube, but then most of the stuff is hosted on that website that has lectures, practice tests. All the stuff on YouTube is free. There is some crowdfunding support for that. But then there are review courses. I'm not sure if every school is like this, but at our school, we had comprehensive exams throughout the program. So after 4 semesters, we had first year ends, and after 4 more semesters, we had second year ends. And so I made some review courses for those year end tests. that was one of the things when COVID happened and our campus shut down. The school used to have its own review classes, but that kind of got shut down when COVID happened. So I tried to make an online course that could kind of take the place of that. And so that's the paid courses are just herb review courses. And then I made one for formulas, and a lot of people use that to review for boards as well. So that was originally meant to be a second year end review, but turns out the formula list is the same as for nationals. So a lot of people use it to study for boards as well.
Right. I don't know if you can see at the bottom there, Nicholas, somebody sends in a chat with a question. It should be a little quote with a 1, a red one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's no way to like share it on the screen, is there? Okay.
Everybody can see it as far as I know.
So what is the one biggest tip you would give to a new graduate to pass their boards? Oh,
this kind of a loaded question without much prep time.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because I'll be honest, I don't really like boards. I just had a call before this where I was talking with someone about boards, and sometimes it seems like there's a difference between the things that, like, I usually focus on the information that I think is useful for understanding Chinese medicine and studying Chinese medicine. And sometimes that can be a little bit different than what's on the board test. I was just having this conversation that somebody said they had one question about what herbs are prohibited by the FDA. You can't use them. And of course, one of those herbs is ma huang. But then on the other hand, they get a question about what is the cooking instructions for ma huang? And it's kind of like, why are you asking a question about ma huang when we can't even use it? So but for tips for passing boards, I would say one, each of the boards has like an outline, so you can go and look at the outline of what exactly is on the test. And so I'd make sure that you actually know what's on the test, because I at least remember when I took herbs, that was surprising to me that some of the things that were on there that I would not expect to be on there, certain things about preparation of herbs and stuff like that. Or on the acupuncture board, there is a lot of stuff on auricular acupuncture and scalp acupuncture. And that was something that at least when I was an intern and when I was in school, and now that I'm in practice, I don't really do a lot of auricular. I don't really do a lot of scalp, but there's a lot of that stuff on the board. So I'd, number one, make sure that you actually know what topics you're supposed to study. Other than that, I'd say know those topics. HB Kim is a really good one to just a good resource to have. Is the big book, the HB Kim Handbook of Oriental Medicine. Sometimes it's just good to flip through that, and it's like, this page is on the test sort of thing. So especially for biomed and stuff like that, I think for me, HB Kim was one of my number one resources. And this doesn't really apply to new graduates, but sometimes, I don't want this to sound mean, but it's kind of like we have the saying in Chinese medicine where they talk about the superior practitioner treats what is not yet ill. And they say that waiting until symptoms appear is like waiting until you're thirsty to begin digging a well. It's like waiting until the battle is upon you to begin forging weapons. And so I guess if you're just graduating, this doesn't help, but I would keep that in mind as you're going through school. It's better to start preparing earlier. So as you're going through school, I feel like I've run into a lot of students that they have an herbs final, they pass their final, they're like, hooray, I passed, and then they move on with their life and immediately forget everything. And like, you have to realize that this information is going to come up again. And so it's kind of like the same idea of don't wait till you're thirsty to begin digging a well. Don't wait until you graduate to start studying for boards. It's hopefully over 4 years of school, you can keep up on that information. And that way, when you get to boards, it's just a matter of reviewing all the stuff you have. It's not like you need to relearn 4 years of curriculum in 6 weeks or whatever. So try to keep up with the information as you go through school, and hopefully it'll be easier once you get to the actual boards.
Okay.
Can I touch on that real quick?
Yeah.
Hey, Nicholas, Christina, the director of admissions here.
Oh, hi, nice to meet you.
I'm also a graduate and going through state boards myself. And what I what I try to tell all of the new students coming in, especially with herbs, because it's a little easier with herbs, go ahead and print the outlines out ahead of time.
Yeah.
That way you can see what herbs are on there. And as you're going through the course, whatever flashcards, whatever study materials that you're using, go ahead and start a board review, like
Yeah.
folder or collection or whatever. That way you're not having to go back and pull it all back out and reorganize it and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
start that from the very beginning, as much as you can with acupuncture too. Acupuncture is just so large and so vast of material, whereas herbs is also a lot, but it's more condensed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it'd be easier for the herbs, but go ahead and start an herb review. I mean, a board review collection as you're going through. So.
Right.
Yeah, and there are some things on here where it's like, I'm trying to think of some of these things about like, how do you prepare the herbs? What's the best preparation for the herbs? There's some stuff, it says there's some stuff on Chinese dietary therapy. And so there's some stuff that, like, until I looked at that outline, it never would have occurred to me that some of that stuff would be on the exam. It's not something I focused on. So yeah, I think it's good to start out by going through that. And then that way you can make sure you know those things as you're going through your curriculum.
Nicholas, so we've got two things. One, we got a question that's been posted, but Miss Karen Martin Brown has her hand up. I assume that's a question. Okay, please.
Hi, Nicholas. I'm
Hi.
Dr. Karen Martin Brown. I'm the CEO of Dragon Rises College.
Oh, great.
Great to meet you.
Hi.
From what I'm gathering from what you said a little bit earlier, the materials that you've produced are not really for boards so much as for students as they're going through our program to help them along the way. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that was definitely the initial intent. I've kind of gotten, like, I started making this herb review course and I've kind of inadvertently got sucked into board review, which is something I didn't really want to do, because part of it is I feel like there are already people who exist that specialize in that. You have like TCM review, Linda Morris. I feel like there are a lot of people who specialize in helping people review for boards. A lot of the stuff, because it started as I was teaching a points one class, I was teaching an herbs one or an intro to herbs class. So it started out as just being stuff to help with those classes. But it's kind of become this thing that I feel like if you have that foundation when you're going through your first year of school, your second year of school, that should hopefully help you actually understand the material by the time that you get to board. So I kind of feel like there are other people who maybe have better information about just how do you pass the boards, what's going to be on boards, go to TCM tests and see what the current trends are. I'm not sure where they get that information, but people rely on that. I feel like if you're studying specifically for boards and you want to know the specific information about boards, there are some good resources for that. What I was trying to do was to help people who are first starting out, and as they're going through their program, it's like you're inundated with a lot of information. It's a very different way of thinking in terms of TCM, even if you some people come from a Western background from nursing. Some people, maybe they don't come from a health background, but it's still a very Western way of thinking of how do you get into that new paradigm of TCM. And so it was more geared towards that in terms of helping those, especially first year, second year students, but especially first year students, kind of understand the material and help get through their classes instead of necessarily get through board. So that's kind of where it started. And now it just turns out, because I made this review course, I'm getting a little bit more sucked into board review, but the main part of it is helping people who are going through their classes.
And I just want to add that we have a college management system called Populi, and on our dashboard we have all of your what you've done so far, your different review courses.
Yeah.
And we paid the extra money for the ones that you charge for.
Oh, okay.
But wanted to let the students know that it's under the board review title on our dashboard. But now I'm hearing that it's not necessarily board review. It actually sounds more appropriate for students going through the program from year one on.
Yeah, and because like some of the stuff, some I have like the kind of the idea with a review course was the idea there was you've already seen the information once, and we're just going back and repeating some of the key points to refresh your memory. I started doing herb lectures that's more meant to be if it's your first time seeing this information, and it's kind of I feel like those are two different things because like those lectures I think I just did like herbs that tonify blood. That was like an hour and a half or 2 hours long. If you're studying for boards, you don't want to spend 2 hours watching a video about one herb category. But if you're in an herbology class and that's your weekly lecture and you have a weekly quiz and you're seeing the information for the first time, it could be helpful to have something that's that long to kind of have some stories, have some extra explanation. So that part is meant more for people who are going through it for the first time. And then there's other stuff to review afterwards. So it's kind of a little bit of each. Hey, kitty.
There was a question typed in here, for you, Nick, but I think you kind of answered it. It was a little bit more geared towards acupuncture, but it says, this is from one of your Patreons and a new student.
Yeah.
What advice would you give yourself if you were a year one acupuncture student?
Yeah. Oh, so first of all, thank you for joining the Patreon. I appreciate that. That helps. And I started making some special videos for the Patreon finally. Sorry, my cat's chewing on my arm too. So if I yelp, that's why. So it's kind of, I think like one of the first videos I made was a video titled like, "Don't Panic," or "If Chinese medicine is hard, that's okay." So I feel like as a first year student, kind of the issue is everything's very overwhelming. It's like you have a lot of new information. A lot of it is in a different mode of thinking. And so it's kind of like usually the pep talk I would give to first year students is that if you're really confused, if you're really overwhelmed, if it seems like this is way too much, if it seems like this is so confusing, I'm never gonna understand it, that's okay. That's normal. Just be patient. So kind of that's kind of my first piece of advice to year one students is just be patient and stick with it. That a lot of times in the program, it front loads a lot of information. And so I definitely felt that way the first year, feeling overwhelmed. Like they're just throwing all this stuff at me. I just have to memorize all this stuff. I don't know what to do with it. And that's just something that happens during your first year. Just be patient with it. If things are confusing, that's okay. You just have to accept that you have to let it be confusing and move on. This was kind of different from my background in math and engineering or like physics and things like that. It's very important that if you don't understand it, you need to make sure you understand that concept before you move on. Otherwise, you're going to be confused later down the line, where it's not like that with Chinese medicine. If you're confused by something, just say, okay, that's kind of confusing and move on to something else. And then later, you'll start to fill in the gap. So that's kind of my big thing is in your first year, it's kind of just about being patient, being okay with being confused, and just try to make sense out of what you can and try to stick with it. I guess other things, I think just because there's such a large volume of information, you need to sooner rather than later figure out good study methods and figure out what works for you. And so I think there are some things that we could just call our general study methods, and that's something you can go online and look up how to study. And this is something that from my previous experience in school, when I was doing more math and engineering stuff, computer science stuff, it was very logical. So it was more about just understanding the logical symptoms. When I came into Chinese medicine as well, it was a lot of memorizing stuff. And so it was a very different type of studying. And so I think when I first started out, I wasn't prepared for that. And it took me a while to figure out things that would work. So I think figuring those things out as soon as possible is good. So you can go online and find specific things about how to study in general, and then just know what works for you. Like some people are really into flashcards. I'm not into flashcards. Flashcards don't work for me, but I do like writing things down. I do like having charts and tables. Some people like to have a lot of different colors and draw pictures. I had a classmate that she would keep a journal and draw all these pictures and things like that. That never worked for me. I like to have plain black and white text that's really boring. So it kind of depends on what works for you. I also realized at some point that if I wanted to know the information, there's a process of learning and forgetting. And I think some people, they use this as a study technique called spaced repetition. But I just discovered by myself that when if I studied something once, I would forget it in a day or two, and then I would have to study it again. And there was a process of forgetting and then relearning and forgetting and relearning. And so I just learned that for myself, that if I had a test on Friday, I needed to start on Monday and study it once, forget it, study it again, forget it. And usually after I've forgotten it and remembered it 3 times, then I would actually know it well enough for the test. But if I just studied once, I wouldn't know it well enough. So that's, I guess, would be the second thing, is there's a lot of information, so you have to know how to study, and it's better to don't wait until your second year to figure that out. Try to get that stuff done as soon as possible.
Other questions for Nicholas?
I have some, I don't know how to do the hand raise like Dr. Martin Brown. I was just going to ask if it was mentioned earlier about the TCM test trends. And you'll see on there things that people say are important to know, and there's some off the wall thing you've never heard of, or this type of question. Any suggestions on where to look for that type of material at, Nicholas? Whether it's acupuncture or herbs or whatever.
That I don't know. And the whole TCM test trends is just something that, like, I'm on Facebook groups, and sometimes people will post them, or sometimes people will ask to post them, and I'm not entirely sure where that comes from, where they get that from. I have a feeling that like I'm pretty sure when you take the test, you sign an NDA, like a non-disclosure agreement. So I'm not sure if the NCCM knows that's a thing and how they would feel about it. So I don't really know. That's just something I see online, and people seem to say it's accurate, but I don't know. It's hard. I think it's because the test is adaptive. It's hard to tell that one person might get a certain question, but another person might not get it, just because it's an adaptive test. Or one person might say, oh, I got all these questions on auricular, and another person will say, oh, I only got 1 or 2, but that's just because the adaptive nature of it. So I don't really know. And like I said, to me, that's kind of one of the annoying things about boards. Like, some of the stuff, I feel like sometimes they're very nitpicky. I think this is both with national boards, and I took California boards. And so there's some of the stuff where I feel like I would never use that in practice. It's hard for me to think that this piece of information is important, because I'm not sure anybody in America who treats malaria with Chinese herbs, but apparently that's something that might be something that comes up, that this certain herb treats malaria or something like that. But kind of my strategy going on that is that I just figured that if I had enough general knowledge about herbs, and if I was able to think things through, that would give me enough to pass the test. And that's kind of what happened. I actually didn't study a lot of those detailed things. So there are certain things where somebody might say, oh, you need to know this formula has this formula modification. And I never actually went through and memorized all the formula modifications, just because there's so many and they come from such different places. But my strategy was that if I know herbs, if I just generally know herbs well enough, and if I know herb categories well enough, that should be enough that I can think through how to answer a question about formula modification. So I guess that's kind of my strategy. And then sometimes if something really weird comes up, then say, oh, I got that one wrong, and you're allowed to get questions wrong and still pass. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
A little chance for self-promotion, I guess, Nicholas. Can you tell us of any success stories from people that have used your training?
Yeah, especially I guess I'm getting the most like I've been actually asking for testimonials about the review courses. So I have gotten quite a few emails about people said they passed their test, or with when we take year ends and things like that. There are people who they failed their exam twice and they were able to pass it the next time. I had one guy that I guess it's surprising to me. There are a few people that apparently they take several review courses, which I thought I always thought that was overkill. But I've had some people that they actually take several different review courses, so they're able to compare them. And I had one guy. I said, "Can you write me a review?" And he just said, "TCM study greater than TCM tests." That's my review. I thought that was kind of funny. But I would say mostly it's a lot of the stuff I work on is just the free stuff for the YouTube channel, and I get a lot of comments there of people saying that that this helped them get through school, that this helped them pass their tests, that they wouldn't have survived school without this, and so I think that's kind of the stuff that is fulfilling to me.
Sure. Of course, doesn't like to see positive results.
Yeah.
Looks like you got a question about Harlan, Kentucky.
Have you been to Harlan, Kentucky
A
lately?
little off the acupuncture, but sure.
Yeah, so I went there once because when I first moved to Kentucky, my friends were watching the show Justified, which actually has some very interesting like Kentucky culture tidbits that you might not get if you didn't live there. But it takes place in Harlan County, Kentucky. So I wanted to go visit Harlan County, Kentucky. Turns out there's nothing in Harlan County. Like I drove from.
There is.
There's one high school.
There was me at one time.
There's one high school.
No, they opened a brewery, friend.
Oh yeah.
Because that's where I was born and lived.
I swear I drove from one end of the county to the other, and I didn't have cell phone reception the whole time. It was like a black. It was a black
But they opened
hole.
a brewery, just to let you know. There's a brewery now.
Yeah, but no, it's kind of funny. Like I watched the show Justified. It's like, oh, and then I realized that they actually filmed the TV show in California. So I'm like, it doesn't look anything like this. But no, I was actually close to there where the floods were. There, that wasn't Harlan. It was down in the boroughs. It wasn't. Trying to think of where that was. Like, I don't know if that was Bowling Green or if that was. Anyway, there was some flooding down in that area, and I actually went and helped clear out some of the flooding stuff. So I wasn't in Harlan County, but I was, I think, 30 miles away. So I haven't been there lately, though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A question, since you've obviously practiced for like a decade now and traveled around, a little curious about I guess the difference in treatment from San Diego, California, dare I say big city, to something in Kentucky. Did you find that to be, obviously the knowledge is the same, but how was the interaction with patients, the treatment, just the overall experience?
Yeah, sometimes I had a discussion with one of my friends from Kentucky about this, about do you think the constitutions are different? Because I feel like you can kind of know, like, to some extent, just like the change in the environment and the change of the weather, that like California is pretty much a desert. So you do see a lot of more dryness. You prescribe a lot of like yin chow san. It's a lot of heat and dryness things. Whereas you go to some place like Kentucky and the weather is much more humid, it's much more damp, and you see a lot more dampness. And so some of that I think might be dependent on the weather, that, you know, there's a lot more allergies there, but just in general, there's a lot more dampness. And then we were talking about, like, is it the environment? Is it the food? Is it like California people are really into like green smoothies and quinoa, whereas Kentucky people are into Kentucky Fried Chicken? And do they have more dampness because of that? So there are some interesting things with that. Just like I think the environment and lifestyle of the places are different. I think like in Kentucky, there were some people that were a lot easier to, like, I think they were more, especially the people who were a little bit more rural, they were a little bit more in tune to the natural cycles. So there were a lot of people that were actually easier to treat just because of that. Like I remember having a patient where it's like she had something that I thought was going to be very difficult to treat, but she got better in one treatment. And I think it's just that even though she didn't seem particularly healthy to me, like when you think of like a California beach bum, but she ate vegetables that grew in her own garden. She went to bed when it was dark outside. She got up when it was light outside, and just being kind of in tune with those natural rhythms, it just made it much easier to treat her versus someone who's not in tune with those things. So some of that is different in terms of the environment, the types of things you see. And then I would also say business-wise, it's very different, at least where I was, that I feel like in California, people are very flaky. It's like I had a hard, like people just wouldn't show up to their appointments. It was really hard to get referrals. I'd have people come in and like somebody would say, "Oh yeah, I handed your business card to 5 different people. Did any of them call you?" I'm like, "No, nobody called me." It's just really hard to get referrals and really hard to get people in. Whereas when I was in Kentucky, it's like you treat one person and then it's like their entire extended family, like 15 members of their extended family come in, or I treated one guy for plantar fasciitis, and he worked on a factory floor and a concrete floor with boots. I treated this one guy. He told everybody else on the floor at work, and so the whole site came in. Or there was even something like the cast of Kinky Boots came through town, and I had one member of the cast of Kinky Boots, because there was a tall guy dancing in high heels, and so he came in for a massage, and after that, like the entire cast came in. And so I feel like that's also an interesting thing, that because the community is definitely more connected, and so it's a lot easier to work on referrals and work on word of mouth, whereas in California, at least in San Diego and Southern California, a lot of people are from out of town. A lot of people aren't as connected, and then just people are kind of flaky and non-committal. So it's very hard to for those referrals to work.
Right.
So sometimes it was a thing where it's like I very quickly learned in San Diego that like I had to text people multiple times to remind them to come to their appointment, that if they didn't get a reminder, they would just not show up. And I had friends like that if we were just like meeting like at a restaurant or something, they're like, if I don't get a text message the morning of, I assume we're not doing it. And so I got into this habit of like texting people multiple times. And then I got to California or I got to Kentucky. And so I kept doing the same thing. And one of my patients said like, "Oh, that's so nice that you texted me a reminder. That's like, oh, that's really nice." I kind of said like, before, if I didn't do that, people would just not show up, and they were aghast at that. So there are definitely cultural differences there too.
Gotcha. But we're joined today by a couple of our different campuses. We have a classroom set up. You might see it as classroom 4 in Gainesville. And we have a couple of that have joined us from our newer campus in Bradenton. So we want to give you guys an opportunity to speak up and ask Nicholas any questions that you may have. Looks like, yeah, there's a mute button in the bottom left-hand corner. Looks like a microphone. You can click that and feel free to speak. Not yet. Got to click it again. See the little mute button?
All right.
There we go.
I was going to type it instead of saying something, but I watched your videos like my first year and a half, and I was watching them like all the time.
Oh,
and you
good.
definitely made a big difference in me, passing my classes, and and I appreciated like your kind of, you talked about like when you talked about like, especially you had those 4 videos about like that were other people besides you that were like for study tips and that kind of stuff.
Oh,
I watched those like multiple times, and I just, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much, because it you make the information very clear and precise. Great. And I've looked at your study materials and stuff like that. So I just want to say thank you. That's all.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm glad that people like it. I'm glad that people appreciate it. And so that's actually been kind of surprising, that like, it's like I first started making those, it was just like I had a classroom of 20 people, and I was like, oh, I'll just make a little review video for my little class of 20 people, and then other people started watching it. I get emails from like people from Denmark and Israel and people all over the world. So that's
Wow.
kind of cool that it's able to help people. So I'm glad that that's helpful.
That's great. You have another comment in our chat section from Angel.
Yeah. I'd like to thank you for all your videos. They were helpful your information. Yeah. So glad. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you like them, and I'm glad you appreciate them. So
Oh, the feedback's definitely good.
yeah, and I know that they're kind of they're slow coming out, so I apologize for that. But I'm glad that people like them, and I'm glad that people are patient with them too, because I kind of made this mistake that I tried to do too many things at once, where it's like I made a couple herb videos like, oh, this is really fun. Then I like stopped and made a couple acupuncture. I kind of have a shiny object syndrome where I move from thing to thing, where it's like, oh, I'm gonna try making a podcast. I'm gonna try doing this. And what happens is I have a lot of things that are half done. And so I know a lot of people keep messaging me like, when are you going to do the rest of the channels? When are you going to do more podcast episodes? When are you going to make stuff on fundamentals? And so I'm glad people are so enthusiastic about the videos, and they'll be there eventually. They just take some time to make.
I think Brianna has a rather out of the box, unique question for you.
If you were an herb, what herb would you be?
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute there, Brianna. Unmute yourself so you can speak. I don't want to.
I feel like, I don't know. I remember when I was first starting out, I really liked the spleen herbs like Baiju and Muxiang and stuff like that. I feel like now I'm a lot more wood and I'm a lot more angry. So maybe Bai Shao.
Okay.
I don't know.
Good one.
I had a Chinese teacher that was his two favorite. He would always say his two favorite herbs were Bai Shao and Wu Weizi. One Wu Weizi because it has all 5 flavors and does everything, and Bai Shao because maybe it's more that I would like to be Bai Shao, not that I actually am Bai Shao, but I feel like I'm tense and angry.
Gotcha. All right. You have another question there from Renee.
Any shoulder location pointers for the SI channel?
All of them.
It's weird, yeah, because that's the weird one that it zigzags. Like when you're on the shoulder, it zigzags, and so so most of that stuff is on the scapula. So you need to know your I guess you need to know like the names of your bony landmarks, and you also need to know how to palpate your bony landmarks and palpate them correctly. So sometimes people have trouble that knowing exactly where the spine of the scapula is, or where the angle of the scapula is, and so and so a lot of those are based off of the spine of the scapula. So you definitely need to know how to locate, how to find the upper border, the lower border, and the medial border. So make sure you know all those, and then it's just knowing a definition. Some of those definitions are really weird, especially, and I feel like some of them have multiple definitions too. If you look in Deadman versus CAM, they might have different definitions or different ways to locate them. I'm thinking like SI13, you can either find the medial part of the spine, or you can go like halfway between T1, and anyway, so there's a couple different things. There's a couple different ways you can locate some of them, but
okay. We have another question from our Gainesville campus from a student.
Do you have any recommendations for new practitioners in the student clinic finding their rhythm? It's all overwhelming in the beginning. Yeah, that's another one where like if you're overwhelmed, that's normal. So number one, just be patient with it. And that's something that as you get more experience, you tend to go quicker. To some extent, I was going to say like remember that, hey, don't chew on that. Remember that it's going to be different. Like sometimes in the beginning, I would have problems with time management, and part of that was like it wasn't necessarily my fault. It was my supervisor's fault that we always had to go and check in with our supervisor, and sometimes the supervisor wasn't there or things like that. And so just remember that in terms of time management, as you get better with the medicine, it's like, because you don't have to confer with other people so much, it will go a little bit quicker. But in terms of finding your rhythm, I would say at first it's okay to keep it simple. I think that's something I tried to do in the beginning, and I was trying to be super clever and come up with the best thing that I could do. Sometimes it's better to just be to keep things simple and think about what are the simple treatments you can do. You don't have to address everything. You don't have to use weird hipster points that nobody's ever heard of. You can just do like the very basic things, and a lot of times that will help. And then also just keeping it simple in terms of number of points, and in terms of like, you don't have to do a front treatment and a back treatment. You can just do one or the other. So I would say in the beginning, just try to focus on keeping it simple. Like if you have a very complex pattern, just try to treat one of the things. You don't need to treat spleen Qi deficiency with liver overacting, with underlying kidney yang deficiency, with liver Qi stagnation, with blah, blah. It's like, just pick one of those things. And then it's okay to keep your point combinations like kind of simple at the beginning. I think less is more in terms of needles. And so that can make it a little bit easier.
All right.
I feel like I may have seen is there a way to make this picture bigger? No.
I think if you right click on them, you can pin them.
Oh, does the pin make it bigger?
Yes.
Oh, that does make it bigger. Oh yeah, I feel like I saw a picture of that before once. So that's pretty cool.
It's probably a little less complete, but I think it was posted on Facebook at some point.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I might have seen it a while ago.
Right.
Oh yeah, I just did something with Jiao. It's got the, turns out I discovered there's a donkey emoji before I was using a picture from Shrek, and that I thought that was probably depressing. It's like, oh yeah, we're eating the donkey from Shrek. So
okay. Very cool. Other questions for Nicholas while we got him for the next 15 minutes? Okay, well, let's see.
yeah, also with I was gonna say new practitioners in the student clinic. I feel like another thing that happens when people start out in clinic is, it's another thing where it can just be overwhelming because the patient is giving you so much information. Like sometimes you're going through and like you have to fill out everything on your chart. At least when I was in school, like if you left one section blank, they would yell at you and they would put this angry pink slip in your file because you didn't complete your charting. And so sometimes it's really easy that you're going through all these questions, how's your sleep, how's your digestion, how's your what does your stool look like, and you're going, and then the student would come out and be like, I have all this information and I have no idea what to do with it. So I feel like that's another overwhelming aspect of starting out in the clinic. And so that's another one that it will get better as you go along, that you can start to see patterns just based on the constitution of the patient and things like that. And you'll start to get better at not everything that the patient tells you, it's not always equally important. So you'll as you go through, you'll get to know things, that certain things like, oh, that's really important, I need to pay attention to that. Certain other things, it's like, okay, that doesn't really matter. Like the certain things I might say about their sleep or their digestion, be like, oh, that doesn't really matter, that's not really relevant to me here. So that's something that will get better as you go along as well. But you can maybe start to think about, like, as the patient is talking, you should probably note it down, but like, is it important in terms of their treatment or things like that, or start to explore things that you think are not, that you think are more important, things like that. So that's another thing.
You're saying there are techniques you're going to pick up through experience that aren't necessarily listed on the application.
Yeah, and you just get some experience of knowing to prioritize certain types of information, or
sure, that makes sense.
Or sometimes just based on their chief complaint, that if they come in with this chief complaint, these sorts of things are important, whereas these other things are not important. So that's something that kind of comes more with experience as well. And sometimes you'll see that, I don't know if your supervisors come into the room, but we would always, like, the student would do their intake first and then the supervisor would come in, and it was like, sometimes as a student, you'd spend like 20 minutes asking all these detailed questions. And then the supervisor would come in and they would ask 3 very specific questions. And from those 3 questions, they got everything they needed to know. And so that's something you can kind of pay attention to, is what questions are they asking, and think about why they ask those questions. And you can start to think in that way too.
Okay. All right. If I can interrupt there, we've got a question. It looks like from classroom 4, which is our Gainesville campus, but I don't know if they're typing or if maybe you can unmute. So the microphone button in the bottom left will unmute you so you can speak to the group. Looking on the Zoom screen here in the bottom left-hand corner, you should see 2 icons, or just type it out. That works too. There you go, sir.
Okay, I'm in my last year of school, and so forgetting key things or not understanding major patterns. Any recommendation of books or videos or series training? So there's that book I always recommend, which is Applied Channel Theory by Wang Juyi, just because that kind of brings a lot of things together in terms of acupuncture. In terms of like key things or major patterns, I feel like a lot of the stuff doesn't really make sense. It's like once you start treating, things become more real. And so a lot of things make more sense as you start treating things. And that can be with patterns, that can be with acupuncture points or herbs. That's like when you're in an acupuncture class, it's like you just memorize all the functions on the heart channel. But then when you have a patient come in with a certain diagnosis and you're saying, oh, I'm going to use heart 6 for this reason, that makes it easier to remember. So that's something I feel like even like Wang Juyi might have recommended this in the book, is kind of keep a private case log of your own cases. And I think that's something he recommended that he did is that you can take your own, like don't put anything HIPAA related in there, but you can take your own notes about the treatments you've done or the treatments you've seen, and then kind of go home and analyze them. That it's like, okay, there was this pattern. What were the key signs and symptoms that led us to think that this was the pattern? And so you can start analyzing it that way. And it's like, okay, then we did this list of points. Why did we do these points? Why did these points help treat this pattern? So I feel like some of those things, especially when you get towards the end, the way that things come together is actually by treating patients and by seeing real life cases and things like that. So it's like when you're just reading some people are like, oh, I'm going to go and read Machiocha cover to cover. And I don't know, maybe that helps or maybe it doesn't. But I feel like in order to like solidify things and to make connections between things, like actually having case studies or actually seeing patients can help with that. So it could be that if you're in the clinic, kind of like copy down those cases and then really think about like even if you're just observing a patient and they said, oh, this is heart heat pouring into the small intestine, like make sure you like go home and read about that. And like, does what you see in the textbook about that pattern doesn't match what you saw in your patient? What kinds of signs and symptoms led you to that diagnosis? And then if you're doing acupuncture, why is it that those particular points helped with that pattern? Or why did we choose these herbs? Why did we modify the formula? And so I think breaking down some of those cases can help kind of put things together. So that's what I might like it. So if you're still seeing patients in a clinic, that's what I might recommend.
Okay.
Or honestly, at this point, I feel like all this time later, like I'm still putting things together, and like I'm still like I spend a lot of time reading textbooks, and there are still things that pop out to me where I'm like, oh, that actually makes sense. Nobody ever told me that before. Like I was just reading through a pulse diagnosis where they talked about the 3 irregular pulses. And then I realized that when I was in school, nobody actually explained to me what caused a pulse to be irregular. And then I was like reading a book and he actually explained why pulses become irregular. I was like, oh, I never realized that was the case before. So some of those things, it's like, I think just because with school, they have to cover so much information, they don't always get to explain the why of everything. And so sometimes as you go through those things, you can start to, for me, it's just by reading random things and researching random things. They're like connections that click, 10 years later.
Forever a student, right?
Yeah. Or one of the really funny ones is they would always say that a choppy pulse feels like a sick silkworm munching on a mulberry leaf, and like nobody could ever explain to me what that meant. Like that's such a weird, like what does a sick silkworm feel like? And then just randomly I was looking up something in Wiseman's Practical Dictionary, and he actually explained that like healthy silkworms eat bamboo or eat mulberry leaves in a smooth line, but the way that you know that your silkworms are ill is they start eating their leaves in a very jagged line. So the fact that they say this was just referring to that jagged nature. So there's some things that it's like years later, it's like suddenly a light bulb goes off. It's like, oh, that actually makes sense now. I never knew that before. So sometimes that just happens over time.
Sounds like a rather unique description there.
I mean,
I kind of have a
yeah.
guessing context. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think 1,000 years ago, people had a lot of free time and thought some had a lot of weird ways to think of things.
Watched a lot of worms.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyone else? We got just a few more minutes here with Nicholas this afternoon for our lunch and learn. Love to hear from you guys. It's time for okay. It looks like their lunch break is just about to end.
Okay, great.
So I guess we've effectively served our purpose here. We would like to take a minute and give you a minute if you want to, promote yourself, any shout outs to your YouTube channel, that kind of thing, to anyone that hasn't heard of you before.
I think if you Google my name, it'll come up. So there's a website, tcmstudy.net. The website comes up, and that's probably the easiest way to find everything.
Okay.
I think on YouTube, if you just type in my name, it comes up. I have a weird Instagram, but if you just look for my name or TCM Study, either one of those things come up. So
okay, and also a rather unique last name, which will pull up your private practice page.
Yeah, and I think that was still my page from San Diego. So I think I had that redirect to my other page. I'd been not. I had that still up for a while, so that I think that doesn't come up anymore. But yeah, you can follow me on Facebook, follow me on Instagram, join the email list, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Nicholas,
thanks for having me.
giving us your time today.
Yeah.
Right. We do want to send a huge thank you for taking the time to come by, share some knowledge, share some wisdom. Apparently meet some people from Harlan County, Kentucky.
Yeah.
You never know. But yeah, definitely huge thanks. Wanna invite you back anytime. Lots of things coming in across chat. So anytime we do it, of course, it's an open door invitation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you all.
You like your cat?
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I'm always worried something bad's gonna happen. Sometimes
We want to see the cat.
yeah, no, because sometimes I close the door and so he can't come in, but like depending on the time of day, like usually in the afternoon he's like asleep and it's fine, but if it's in the morning, like there'll be little paws sticking under the door, and it's like, oh, this is not good. But I'm always afraid he's gonna come. Like sometimes he likes to chew on the cables, and like those are expensive. or when I'm just working, a lot of times he'll come and he'll like start walking on the keyboard. Like he doesn't realize that the keyboards are different from regular surfaces. So I'm always worried that if I'm doing something live, he'll like press a button and it will disconnect me or delete everything that I'm working on or stuff like that. So a lot of times I lock him out of the room. But this time he's been okay. That he hasn't caused too much trouble.
All right. And one other thing, just as mentioned in chat, this video will be recorded. We'll make it available on Dragon Rise's YouTube, and of course we'll make it. We'll share that link with you, Nicholas.
Okay, great.
The beeping is, but yeah, we'll definitely make it available on YouTube so that anybody that couldn't make it, and I'll send out a link as here's where you guys can go watch it. Yeah. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hope to have you back sometime soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye all.